Ladies and gentlemen, good evening to all of you. In international news headlines, the situation is becoming more complicated and dangerously so for the West and NATO, especially for Ukraine. Russia has just issued a very serious warning to NATO and Ukraine, to Ukraine and its allies as a whole. And what must especially be said is that today, yes, June 2025, at the moment when Russia has just launched its offensive on the 5th region of Ukraine, it should already be noted that the other regions are already occupied. As you can see here on this map that you see here, you can see over there, that's Russia. And just next to it, you have Kiev. On the other side, at the top, you have Sumy, and you can see Donetsk, the area in red, in pink color there, that's Donetsk. So everything that's in pink is what Russia has managed to take back. And the recent strikes that Russia has carried out have indeed been in the areas of Kharkiv and Sumy. And then a bit further down, you can see Crimea, which has been annexed since 2014. So this is Ukrainian territory. Look, Kiev is just somewhere around there. And so this blue strip you see there is the river called the Dnieper. You may remember that every time we have a video conference, when I give the update for the past 24 hours, I always say, the central group did this, the northern group did that. But especially the Dnieper group achieved this result. So this Dnieper area is an extremely strategic zone. As soon as you cross this area, you immediately find yourself in the western part of Ukraine. And this advance that Russia has just launched is a very tough blow for Ukraine. Look here. The region that Russia is trying to conquer is Dnipro. It's written as Dnipropetrovsk, which is in the yellow band. It is this region that Russia has begun to conquer. So, as you can see, it's right in the middle of Ukraine. Sumy is being bombed regularly. Kharkiv is being bombed and is almost retaken. And finally, Russia crosses the Dnieper. Russia reaches the Dnipro. And so, Ukraine is going to be completely divided in two. We will have these two blocks. One large part that will belong to Russia, and another very large part that will be under the control of Volodymyr Zelensky. From that point on, Russia already achieves victory, an unprecedented victory. And look all the way in the back, behind Kiev, at the edge of Ukraine, is that small area that the vice chairman of the Russian Security Council had announced as being just a tiny part, a very narrow strip that will remain with Ukraine. All of that area is considered as meant to be part of the buffer zone that Russia has decided to establish. A buffer zone means an area where there is no conflict. All of this area will go back to Russia. Ladies and gentlemen, when I tell you that we are witnessing the restart of the conflict, you should know that during all these 3 years, Russia was just where you see in pink and sometimes tried to advance toward Kharkiv, Sumy. But as we speak, the lines of defense, the defensive lines around Sumy and Kharkiv have collapsed. Russia has almost regained its territories. And that is why Russia deemed it necessary to open another front, to move in on the Dnipro. And as if this advance were not enough, the vice chairman of the Russian Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, who is a former head of state, is a former Russian president and has served as prime minister. Today, he is the number 2 at the Russian Security Council. And when we talk about the Security Council, as you know, it is the body that decides the fate of Russia's security. So what is he saying? What is the serious warning he's giving to the West? Ladies and gentlemen, in this video conference, that is what we are going to talk about. But before we continue, you need to share this video conference as much as possible. Give it lots of likes. Yes, lots of likes. That's what encourages me to keep going. And above all, be sure to leave lots of comments. Let's dive deeper What did Dmitry Medvedev say? So, while the Russian army announced today that it has launched a new offensive on Dnipro, this man, Dmitry Medvedev, described the advance of Russian troops in the Dnipro region as proof. He says that this is proof that Ukraine and its Western allies ignored Moscow's warnings. Moscow had warned them several times, but they ignored it. They deliberately chose to ignore it. So, according to Dmitry Medvedev, Kiev did not want to acknowledge reality during diplomatic contacts. That is what is happening on the ground. Russia is in a position of strength. Ukraine should acknowledge this and agree to a deal for an agreement to be signed. But Ukraine listened to the Kisama. Ukraine listened to the Emmanuel Macrons. That is to say, the white powder gang. He set his heart at a higher level. And then, in the end, it's something else. So he says this. He says, it is now the Russian army that is shaping things on the battlefield. Specifically, what is he saying? He says, those who refuse to acknowledge the realities of war during negotiations will be confronted with new realities on the ground. That's it. So he wrote this on Telegram. What does he actually mean? Those who refuse to recognize the reality of the war during negotiations will have to acknowledge the reality on the ground. In other words, as long as Ukraine and its so-called allies refuse to acknowledge the realities on the ground, refuse to see that Russia has the upper hand on the battlefield, as long as they refuse, the reality on the ground will catch up with them, because it will push Russia to keep taking over Ukrainian territory. And in a way, that's unstoppable. So meanwhile, President Volodymyr Zelensky starts to cry. He whines. He complains about the Western partners, especially the Americans. He says that the Americans lied about the 20,000 American missiles that are supposedly on their way, that were supposed to be on their way to Ukraine. He says, yes, 20,000 American missiles are on their way, but not to Ukraine. So he claims that the United States did not provide the 20,000 missiles they promised Ukraine under the Biden administration. The Trump administration is continuing its disengagement from the conflict and its shift of focus toward the Middle East. So he laments because with this renewed conflict, Ukraine finds itself with no ammunition, no financial means, and no soldiers on the ground. In any case, if there are any, there are very few. And so this is the situation. This means that the statement made by Dmitry Medvedev implies that Russia will go deeper. And so the extent to which Russia will go will force Ukraine to get down on its knees and ask for negotiations. That's what it means. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the headline news. Thank you for sharing it as much as possible. I'll be back with more news shortly. This was the voice of your one and only Samurai.